Welcome to Cybersecurity Scams and Fraud, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Sarah Edwards and I'm your moderator for today. Our presenter for the webinar today is Matt Duran. Matt Duran is Director of Training and Research at LMG Security and a Black Hat USA instructor. He holds his computer science degree from the University of Montana, and his malware research has been featured on the NBC Nightly News. Matt is the co-author of the new book, Ransomware and Cyber Extortion. Matt, I'm passing you control of the webinar.
Thanks everyone for joining. Again, my name is Matt Duran with LMG Security, and we're going to be covering new tactics in scams and fraud as it relates to cybersecurity. We really enjoyed giving this webinar, and we had a great time putting it together because these are very important tactics that you as a defender in your organization can use to stop yourself from becoming a victim of what we tend to see as some of the most financially devastating types of crime on the planet. Now, to start off today, we're going to be covering some cybersecurity headlines that have really hit the news real hard lately. First one we're going to talk about is going to be MGM. Now, MGM, if you're not familiar with it, suffered a significant cyber attack recently, and all of it came around to basically what we're going to be talking about today: social engineering. We're going to be talking about how criminals break through things like multi-factor authentication. We'll be going through some examples of business email compromise, and then we have a sting operation brand new for this webinar that we would really love to show you. Finally, as we go through the webinar, we're going to be covering some tips and tricks to help you, again, from becoming the victim of one of these types of cyber attacks. Now let's jump right into MGM. So MGM was taken completely offline on September 10th. System-wide outage at MGM resorts all around the country, really, but primarily in Las Vegas, where the bulk of their business resides. They had to go back to things like cash only at restaurants. They couldn't do room charges. They couldn't take credit cards. Digital room keys stopped working. TVs went down. The phones went down. Websites went down. Casino machines went offline. I mean, it was like a nightmare scenario for them. Now, the big thing that we wanted to point out right away is that MGM was pretty upfront about exactly what happened inside their organization. Attackers had broken in, they had claimed to have stolen data, and then they had deployed ransomware across the network to take down the infrastructure that MGM relies on for normal day-to-day operation. Now, in the wake of all of the scattered and confusing news that came out about MGM and what had actually happened inside of their network, the hackers behind the attack actually stepped forward into the spotlight and gave us a rundown of what they had done inside the network. This is the Alpha V ransomware group. And again, if you paid attention to cybersecurity news recently, you have likely seen this name before. These guys are a prolific ransomware group. They're responsible for some high-profile hacks, and they have been devastating in the networks that they have been in. Now, Alpha V came out and said that they had stolen a bunch of data from the MGM network, and they had posted a link to download any and all data that had been exfiltrated on membership materials and internal information for the hotels and resort chain on their darknet website. This was up until September 12th. On September 13th, it came back down. Now, this to us normally indicates that there was some level of negotiation happening between the ransomware group and MGM specifically, but in this case, it does not appear that was the case. The attackers came back out and said, we still continue to have access to MGM's infrastructure. If a deal is not reached, we'll carry out additional attacks. And this seemed to be what they followed through on as they moved through the scenario. Now, MGM came out and gave a full disclosure on data theft. They said that they understand criminals obtained certain personal information belonging to some customers who transacted with MGM prior to March of 2019. They also got some employee information, including things like employee passwords, employee information, employee social security numbers, and the like. Not a good place to find yourself, and this was a massive loss of data. What's more, we are seeing some follow-on effects for this already. There's already been a warning about a class action lawsuit against MGM, and we've also seen, unknown if this is related, but we've also seen members of the MGM BetMGM service, their online gambling service, come out and say that their accounts have started to be empty. Now, we don't have any indication that this is 100% linked to the attacks against their network from the Alpha V crew, but the timing is somewhat suspicious. That being said, it could be something like those accounts specifically just got hacked in some other way and their account balance was stolen, but we'll stay tuned and see what actually ends up happening with this. Now, there was a pretty significant amount of financial damage that has already been reported by MGM from this attack specifically, and this comes from MGM's SEC 8K filing. This is new. We're seeing a lot of new information coming out with these SEC filings that we didn't get a couple of years back, mainly because the government has changed how reporting through the SEC actually functions. If you suspect a material incident has occurred within your network, something that will drastically impact your ability to function as an organization, and you're a publicly traded company like MGM, then you've got 4 days to actually file a report with the SEC, and then these become public. Again, this is how we know as much as we do at this point. MGM overall is looking at about $100 million worth of loss because of this cyber attack specifically. About $10 million of that is from what we refer to as non-reoccurring fees. This is MGM hiring legal counsel, hiring a forensic investigator, and basically paying for the remediation of the attack itself. $10 million is no small chunk of change. Now, they do believe that their insurance will cover the vast majority of the impact here. So, I mean, I suppose on their end, that's good news, although their premiums are probably going to skyrocket. But the full scope and cost of this breach is unknown at this point, could not be determined. And that's a quote from MGM directly. So let's talk about how this actually happened. And this is being pieced together by a bunch of different news organizations who have shown to be a little bit more credible about the actual information they're reporting at this point. But Bloomberg went out and said that social engineering of the company's information technology help desk, which is a third-party provider, was likely the introduction to the network for the hackers at this point. And you can see the article that is sitting up from TechCrunch in the upper right-hand corner. A phone call to a help desk was likely all it took to hack MGM. Now, obviously, it's a little more complex than this once they get inside the network. It wasn't just a phone call and the entire casino went down. There's a lot more to it than that. But it gives you an idea of how they went in the first place. A former MGM employee has also come out under condition of anonymity and talked about MGM's cybersecurity policies. They stated that the help desk was vulnerable to attack. For something like a password reset and an MFA reset, which is what we believe happened in this case, all you really need to know is the employee's name, their employee ID number, and their date of birth. And a lot of this information is very easy to obtain with easy open source intelligence gathering tools. I mean, you can find a lot of that information just on social media if you know where to look for it. MGM was also using Okta, and Okta came out with another briefing on a similar style of attack vector that a lot of attackers have been using lately. We'll talk about that here in just a second, but you can see kind of where this is going. An MGM employee's information was compromised. Attackers were able to gain initial access, at the very least, into that network, likely through calling that help desk, having their MFA token reset, and having the password reset. In a lot of cases, especially if a network is not properly configured or secured on the inside, that small level of access can lead to something much, much bigger. If you've watched our webinar from Zero to Takeover, you've seen us go through an exact kind of scenario like this. Now, we want to bring this up as our kind of our first tip as we're talking about how to avoid cybersecurity scams and fraud. And the very first one, I know it's a broken record, but go with me on this: multi-factor authentication. And using a good kind of multi-factor authentication, not something just like SMS. We'll go through the different kinds here in just a second. But realistically, when we're talking about authentication, we're talking about how you verify you are who you say you are. And we do this in 3 levels normally: something you know, like a password; something you have, like an MFA key or something like that; and then something you are, like a biometric signature on your phone. And if you're using more than one, congratulations, you're now using MFA. It's that belt and suspenders approach to cybersecurity that we have preached so hard for the last couple of years. Microsoft has come out recently with some stats on business email compromise and cloud service compromise, and they're estimating that over 90% of the time these attacks can be stopped with things like multi-factor authentication. Basic security hygiene is really what it takes to secure your systems. Now, it's a little more complex than that, but again, we'll cover it as we go. Now, I mentioned Okta previously, and Okta came out with, and this came out in August, they came out with a report on what they call cross-tenant impersonation attacks. This appears to be what happened with both MGM and the Caesars Casino in Las Vegas, if you've been following. Both of those casino chains were hit with very, very similar ransomware attacks by the same group within about the same 2-week period. Looks like there's a lot of similarities there that we can glean off of here. But when Okta gave their case study on this, they basically lined out how this happened. An IT service desk is targeted. The goal is to reset multi-factor authentication and register the hacker's own device as the multi-factor pass. This is something that we've seen before. The other target here was Okta super administrators. Once they got access to an Okta super administrator account, that gave them access to pretty much all of the contents of the Okta vault. It also gave them access to their single sign-on service and a lot more. Now, this comes down to a trend that we've seen coming up recently, and that is the use of voice phishing, using just a standard phone call for a phishing attack. In fact, it's one of the things that we test when we do our social engineering experiments. We don't just send out emails to people and hope they click on them. We follow along with industry standards, and we'll follow up with a phone call. Studies show that if you follow up a phishing email with a phone call, you bump up your effectiveness rate by about 40%, which is substantial when we're talking about a way to break in and steal the data from your organization. Now, Okta's promised to come out with a little bit more information on this and some other types of strategies you can use to avoid situations like this. We'll bring those to you as they come out. But again, it was very interesting. Now, I mentioned before, we're piecing this together from a lot of different journalistic sources. And the reason I say that is because we're getting some conflicting information about how exactly the attack happened, the level of sophistication behind it, and what the potential stopgaps in security services were for MGM. VX Underground, who is a prominent group that reports on cybersecurity, malicious cybersecurity activity on Twitter, I'm sorry, X, came out and posted this, and they said all Alpha V ransomware group did to compromise MGM Resorts was hop on LinkedIn, find an employee, and then call the help desk. A $33 billion company was defeated by a 10-minute conversation. Now, again, was it that simple? Probably not. But this is what journalists have been reporting, and this has really caused kind of a black eye from a public relations standpoint for MGM specifically. Now, when we're talking about scams involving phones, which is, again, how we believe this actually happened, there's a few things we need to talk about. First off, it is very easy to spoof caller ID. I'm sure anyone who has a cell phone who receives the litany of spam phone calls every day that I think most of us probably get at this point has noticed that a lot of times those spam phone calls seem to be coming from your specific area, or at least your area code. That's because spoofing a phone number is a trivially easy thing to do. There are free services out there that can do it. There are paid services. LMG specifically uses something like SpoofGuard when we do our phone social engineering, and it lets us set our phone number as really whatever we want it to be. Moving a little bit more into the technological advancements behind fraud, we're also seeing a big move towards voice cloning, and this is something that can be used again to fool your service desk. A lot of this is artificial intelligence backed, and in some cases it only takes about 30 seconds worth of your voice as a recording to completely clone how you would talk. Something that is kind of frightening when we talk about voice verification with call centers, like when you call into your phone company, your cable company, or someone like that. They usually use your phone number and then your basic voice cues as a way to verify you. If something can mock that, or if something can impersonate that, that means they can bypass those security settings. If you want to check out how this works specifically, check out 11labs.io. They have a really interesting demonstration they can give you where it shows exactly how voice cloning functions inside their system. But it also leads to a bigger tip, and that is relying on strong caller verification. If you utilize something like a call center, where your employees or your customers have to call in, make sure that there are good ways for them to verify themselves with that call center. You can see the verify process sitting here. Also, consider using other tools like Okta in conjunction with those call centers to make sure that that you are covering yourself from a good baseline prior to allowing sensitive information to get out the door. You can also leverage advanced call fraud detection. Phone printing is what this used to be referred to as, and the terminology has shifted a little bit, but realistically it means the call center that you're working with looks at a few different things. It looks at the phone number you're calling in from, potentially the origin of the call, the device that you're using to call in, and then background noise when it hears it. In a lot of these cases, something like SpoofCard or some of the other spoofing software out there will allow you to input background noise to make it sound like you're somewhere that you're actually not. So you could be sitting in your living room and make it sound like you're in traffic or in a busy office building. Oftentimes, this can lend credibility when we're talking about why information needs to be put out the door. And if those are known audio patterns, then a phone printing service can identify those and make it a little bit more difficult for attackers to get in. We also want to talk about MFA bypass because, again, this was a significant portion of the MGM attack specifically. Microsoft has come out and warned, well, not to deaf ears, but they've been billowing about this for a while. Hackers are finding increasingly sophisticated ways to bypass multi-factor authentication. In a lot of cases, this can be something as simple as what's referred to as an MFA fatigue attack, where they just simply send you prompts to log into your account over and over and over and over again until you finally relent, get annoyed, and just hit approve. This happens in a lot of cases. In fact, we've noticed that in cases like Uber, and in other cases that have involved MFA bypass, that was the exact tactic that very sophisticated groups have used, simply just annoy you into letting them in the door. So again, make sure that your employees are trained on how to use multi-factor authentication appropriately and what to do if they feel like there is some kind of attack against their account. Now, as opposed to just showing you how insecure some forms of, or telling you how insecure some forms of MFA can be, we figured we'd show you instead. Remember, at LMG, we like to show, not tell. So let's go ahead and go through that. we decided to go out and look on the dark web and see if we could find a piece of software that would allow us to hijack an account that had multi-factor authentication. And as it turns out, there's quite a bit of them. This is a two-factor authentication, OTP, or one-time password bypass software suite. This one goes for about $60. So we went ahead and set up a scenario to show you exactly how something like this would work. I'd like to introduce you first and foremost to Hack Enable Professional Services. And we're going to be going after Sue Septible, the finance clerk today. We'll actually see her twice as we go through our case studies. But we wanted to go through and actually showcase what it would be like to break into her account. So let's do that. Let's break into the finance clerk's account, see what it is we can do. Our goal here is going to be to successfully compromise the finance clerk's Microsoft 365 account. We are going to put ourselves in a position to commit fraud. We'll be looking to steal sensitive data, and our strategy here is going to be to steal the user's credentials and bypass that multi-factor authentication check. What we need to do is evade detection, and we also need to be able to log in repeatedly without triggering another multi-factor prompt, because again, that's going to be a dead giveaway that we're in the account. All right, so let's go shopping. We decided to go out on the dark web. We went to a place called the Cypher Marketplace, and this ended up having pretty much exactly what we needed. Remember our wish list here. We wanted to steal passwords. We want to bypass multi-factor authentication. We want to imitate normal looking websites, and we want to facilitate what's referred to as an adversary in the middle attack. This means we're going to put ourselves in between our victim and the service they're trying to log into and steal their credentials in transit as they attempt to log in. And sure enough, jackpot. We found exactly what we were looking for. This is a piece of software called Modlishka, and Modlishka does pretty much everything we asked. It can do point and click, HTTP, and HTTPS reverse proxy of an arbitrary domain. I know that sounds very, very jumbled and techy, but I'll show you what that means here in just a quick second. We can implement client domain hooking attacks. This is another nice feature to have on the toolkit. We can strip websites from all encryption. We can go through and automate our own certificates. We can make our phishing websites look legitimate. And it's written in Go, so it works on pretty much anything, Windows, Linux, Mac, whatever we want to do. It's also going to be really hard to detect. This one was only 10 bucks. So of course we went ahead and hit checkout, paid with our Bitcoin, and within a few minutes we had our software sitting in our inbox waiting for us to go. So let's show how this actually works. Here's us actually stealing the finance clerk's session. And I say session specifically as an intentional thing, and I'll show you why here. So when the user goes to log in, we would normally send them a phishing email or something like that, which would redirect them to a phishing website. This is what the phishing website looks like. It looks basically exactly like Microsoft's normal login page, because realistically, it is Microsoft's normal login page. As you can see from our readout from our tool, we're actually proxying login.microsoftonline.com straight through to our malicious website. This means that the victim in this case can interact with this exactly as they would with the Microsoft login. And by the time it's all said and done, they'll be able to log in as they normally would. So at this point, it pops up an authentication dialog box for us. So we're logging in as Susan at hackenable.com. It's going to go ahead and allow them to input the password, and then it's going to prompt for identity verification because this user does have MFA. In this case, unfortunately, they have a weak MFA as a fallback, so they're going to go ahead and send a text message off to the user's phone number. But of course, the website's going to be fine with this. It's going to go ahead and pop up. It's going to ask for that one-time password, and the password is going to be delivered by a text. Now, keep in mind, again, this is not Microsoft's website. This is our phishing website. So we're hijacking all of this traffic as it goes through. Once the user inputs their MFA key and clicks on verify, they are sent directly through to Microsoft's website, and they are into their account, not really knowing anything else has happened. On the back, though, what we're more interested in is the cookie associated with that user's session. You can see right here, Susan at hackenable.com, and we can click view cookies. So we'll level set here really quick for those who are not familiar with the terminology. What is a cookie when we're talking about web browsing activity in general? Well, as a high-level description, a cookie is a small text file that ends up getting stored on your computer, and it contains information relevant to the online services that you're signing into, things like a unique ID for your computer, the session information behind your sign-in event. Sometimes it contains credentials, although a lot of times it doesn't, and it contains other identifying information about the services that you're logging into. This is realistically one of the features that allows you to log into a website and not have to enter a username and password every time you go and refresh the page. It's a convenience feature, and it is something we find on most online services. Now, once we have that cookie in our hands, all we have to do is import this into our web browser, hit the F5 button to refresh the page, and we are directly into Sue's account. No username or password was needed. It did not trigger an MFA bypass, it did not trigger an MFA prompt. And we have access to not just the email, but also all of the apps that this user has access to on a normal working basis. So I tell you this to tell you a couple of things here. One is that the use of one-time passwords through SMS, through things like text message or email or something like that, are not a sufficient, or I would call it a high security solution for multi-factor authentication. We really want to have something that's a little bit better at our fingertips in order to make sure we are keeping those accounts nice, safe, and secure. This chart comes from Microsoft, and they really do lay it out for us in some pretty succinct terms. Bad is going to be using just a password. That does not count as strong authentication, even if your password is very, very good. Realistically, that means if I steal that password, I can log directly into the account, and there's nothing to stop me. There's no additional form of verification. Now, good is going to be something like SMS or voice and a password. Now, this is anything is better than nothing. So anything better than just having a password on the account is going to be a security benefit. But there are better options out there. And one of the better ones we have is the use of something like an authenticator app on your smartphone with what are called push notifications, or one-time passwords that are inside the app. These are rotating keys. They rotate every 30 seconds to a minute, depending on which ones you have. When you log into a website, it'll prompt you for the number on your authenticator app, or it'll send a push to your device that says, "Is this you approved?" We also have one-time password hardware tokens. We call them key fobs. Likely you've seen those kind of phase themselves out over the years. Those were great at first, but we can do all that with our smartphones now. So why have an extra piece of tech to carry around with us? One-time passwords are absolutely on the way out, though, and this is something that we've seen pop up in multiple different cases. The U.S. government is actually pushing to move people away from this. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of services that only allow for one-time password via text message or via email as their second form of authentication. We've seen demos of this happening, and it is again fairly easy for an attacker to spoof the information that is included in a text message and trick someone into giving up that password as it comes through. Now, when we're talking about the best solution for strong authentication, the big one we want to talk about, and this is our golden, rosy, rainbow-laden future here, passwordless authentication. Let's get rid of that something you know section of the authentication triad completely. Let's get rid of passwords because they are difficult to manage. And in a lot of cases, a weak password is what causes unnecessary access into a network. If we go for something like passwordless, we now have things like pass keys, and this has become the default sign-on method for Google accounts moving forward this year. We can see phone sign-ins through the authenticator using a biometric secondary factor. That's what I use specifically, and I love how it works. We see single sign-on, we see FIDO2 security keys. There's a lot of really nice options out there that you can provide to your users and give them a kind of a good bunch of options that they can pick from, whatever's going to be the most appropriate for them. Also, if you're using newer Windows laptops and Azure Active Directory, you can use their facial recognition feature, Windows Hello, as that multi-factor step. It's a really nice feature to have available to you. It also means that your cloud services need to be reviewed. Make sure that you're not leaving weak authentication methods open, and make sure that you're not putting yourself at unnecessary risk by not fixing simple problems or simple security misconfigurations inside of your cloud systems as you go. Cloud configuration reviews mean you just get another set of eyes from a group who has a lot of experience working with those products specifically. These are the most popular in things like Microsoft 365, inside of AWS, and in Google Workspace. It's always great to have somebody take a second look, mainly because security basics in these applications change so frequently. It can be very, very difficult to keep up with what the latest and greatest best practice trends are. If you have somebody who does this on a daily basis, pop in there and take a look. They're going to be able to tell you with a pretty high degree of certainty quickly whether or not something is misconfigured or whether or not something could just be a little bit more secure for you. Now, moving forward, we want to talk a little bit about business email compromise, because realistically, that is going to be the goal of a lot of cybersecurity fraud. This is by far the most financially devastating type of cybercrime on the planet, to the tune of about $2.7 billion last year lost through business email compromise scams. In fact, the FBI and the IC3 just put out a really, really nice report on the stats that we saw from 2022 in terms of accounts being compromised. They estimated domestic and international exposed dollar loss at over $50 billion just for the last roughly decade. That's a hard number to stomach, when we talk about the amount of money that's actually lost in these scams. $50.8 billion over a 9-year period of time. So when we're talking about business email compromise, again, we'll level set here really quick. What are we talking about? Business email compromise is the practice of an attacker breaking into your email account, stealing money. Usually they'll leverage something like a hacked email or a weak password or something like that. They'll pop into the account. They'll monitor communications. They will look for opportunities to defraud you, and then they will send carefully crafted, spoofed, or hacked email to trick a recipient into transferring funds. Oftentimes, this is a wire transfer or an ACH transfer or something like that, into an account that the attackers have access to, but the victim does not. So we bring this up again because it's the ultimate goal for a lot of these types of scams. It's not just breaking into your account for fun. In some cases, in a very few cases, it's for the theft of information, something like espionage. But for the most part, we're looking at financial loss. When we look at the cybersecurity losses associated with all kinds of attacks across the board, over a quarter of those are business email compromise specifically. Again, $2.7 billion in the last calendar year, which is just the ones that we know about. It's likely going to be more than that. But 88% of people who responded have experienced something like a supplier-based email attack. And the loss to a BEC attack is 80 times greater than a ransomware attack. This is pretty sobering when we look at the statistics behind this. Now, ransomware operators will use a lot of the same tactics that BEC operators will when they break into accounts in the first place. A lot of this comes down to something like phishing, which I know we had a question from the audience on that, but we'll address that in a little bit more detail at the end of the webinar. But if you're planning to block something like business email compromise, you are just kind of, by the nature of the security systems you're putting in place, making ransomware harder on your network, and that is a good thing when we want to talk about overall security. All right, so common types of business email compromise scams. Executive fraud is a big one. We see that one pop up very, very frequently. Real estate transaction fraud is huge. If you saw our email scams and trends webinar from late last year, beginning of this year, you saw us go through the case of Raymond Hushpuppi, a Nigerian national who was responsible for untold millions of dollars worth of loss, and a lot of these were from real estate transaction fraud. We also see things like payroll redirects. We see vendor payment invoice fraud, we see billing fraud, and then lately we've started to see a big boost in attorney impersonation. A hacker pretending to be someone from a law firm, which carries a little bit more gravitas when they're talking about financial penalties or something like that. Either hitting you up with an invoice that's due or demanding some kind of settlement from you or something along those lines. And again, they've been very successful in doing this. Now, business email compromise is not universal across the board as targeted towards one industry. We actually see this targeted very, very frequently towards professional services and associations, way more frequently than any other type of organization on the planet. In fact, over a quarter of all business email compromise scams are targeted right there, professional services and associations. And this includes things like real estate. So let's go through a very quick sting operation and let's talk about what attackers actually do when they break into something like your email account. So we're going to go back and we're going to talk about hack-enabled professional services again. In this case, Susceptible, the poor victim who got hacked in that very first example we showed you going through that proxy web page, is actually participating in a big real estate transaction. And I was so excited to put this scam together because it came out way better than even I thought it could. And this was something that we led a group of attackers through. They bit on our bait and they totally did exactly what we wanted them to. Hack Enable in this case is buying a new building, and so there's an ACH payment of right about $250,000 that needs to be sent as soon as possible over to the real estate company that they're working with, Paul Allen Real Estate. Now, Stu needs to send Paul a form so that he can verify his bank details. So let's see how this actually goes. The very first thing that happens here is Sue is likely going to be phished. And again, this could be something like that Modlishka page. It could be another like Evil Engine X, Man in the Middle proxy service, or something like that. In this case, though, it's just going to be a fairly standard phishing website. We get something like a OneNote email, which we've seen a big trend of recently. And it has an option in the email to open up a document that's been securely shared with you. Now, in a lot of cases, these emails are going to be crafted towards your organization specifically. In this case, right at the very top, you can see that this one has the organization's name right in the upper banner. and it looks believable enough. I mean, this is what a OneNote email actually looks like. Now, the reason we see OneNote so frequently instead of things like Word or Excel, which we would traditionally see in these cases, people have become a little bit more skeptical of random Word documents or Excel spreadsheets showing up in their inbox. However, OneNote is a feature in Microsoft Online services that is not widely used by a lot of people. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, plenty of people normally use it, but there isn't really the same level of scrutiny when you get a OneNote email. Hackers and researchers have also found that these are, enough, more effective enough that it's worth attackers putting these out instead of their traditional ones. All right, so now we end up on the phishing website. And again, this is going to look exactly like a normal Microsoft login page. We've got our Microsoft banner. Everything looks like it's completely normal. But again, this information is all being pulled directly from Microsoft, so it should look normal. One of the other things I want to point out is the lock icon in the upper left-hand corner of the web browser. This indicates to us that this is a secure website. One of the big things that we used to tell people all the time when we were talking about preventing phishing attacks inside your network was to keep an eye on that URL bar. And if something pops up with the unlock or slash through the lock, that means that it's not using SSL encryption. That means it's just a standard HTTP web page, and any data that's sent back and forth from that web page can be intercepted in clear text. That is no longer the case. A lot of phishing websites are now moving towards using SSL encryption on their websites to make themselves look a little bit more legitimate. Now, of course, that URL is totally not legitimate. That does not look like Microsoft at all. Pub dash big long random string of letters, almost looks like an MD5 hash at r2.dev. So obviously this is something that if you're training your employees to look out for phishing emails, that's one of the big ones. Look at that URL, make sure they understand how to spot something that's this nasty looking. It's kind of low hanging fruit here, but one of the big things that we look at. But again, the connection is completely secure. So let's take a look and see where this cert actually comes from. How are attackers able to go through and put something on their website that should normally be for normal verified websites for the purpose of internet security? Well, as it turns out, there are a lot of organizations out there who will do this for you either for free or for a very low cost. In this case, the certificate itself came through an organization called Let's Encrypt. And if you've ever heard of them before, Let's Encrypt is a nonprofit organization who will provide TLS certificates to your website for free. There's no charge for this, and there's very little verification. So again, we'll harken back to our other webinar on this where we talked about services like Namecheap. Basically, when you sign up for a new domain, there's going to be an option for include SSL or TLS. If you click that box, in a lot of cases, especially with something like Google Workspace, you may be able to get that cert associated with your website absolutely free. There's nothing there to add to the cost of it, and it makes things look a little bit more legitimate. So you get a cert, I get a cert, everybody gets a cert. It's just that simple. Now with this website, we noticed some odd behavior. The very first thing that we saw was a notification that our password was incorrect. When we entered in our username and our credentials, we immediately got an error that said the account password is incorrect. If you can't remember your password, reset it now. And there's a little option there that says forgot my password. Ironically, that does take you to Microsoft's actual password reset website, but in this case, that's not what they want you to do. What the attackers are really looking at doing here is one of two things. If you enter that password a second time and it matches the first password that you put in, that means you have now verified to the attacker that that is in fact your password. However, if you change the contents of that password, if you think to yourself, okay, well, that password didn't work, so maybe it's the variation of my password where I used an @ symbol instead of an A, or an exclamation point instead of an R or an I, or something along those lines. They're now compromising multiple passwords at the same time. All of this is beneficial to our adversary at this point, and none of it is something that we want to be giving up. So remember, if you do run into a website like this, keep an eye out for these telltale signs. If you're pretty sure your password is incorrect and it tells you the account was incorrect, just take another look at that upward URL bar. Make sure that everything is legit on the website before you go through and get yourself fully compromised. Now, once the attackers have access to the username and password, and in a lot of cases, it's either going to be a session token or a cookie, they will go ahead and log into the account. And that's exactly what we observed in this case. the attackers logged directly into Sue's account. And this is information that we pulled from Microsoft's backend audit log system. We can see the date and time when they logged in. We can see their IP address specifically. And in this case, we'll talk about this in a second here, but the IP address and the geolocation of that IP address can be kind of, again, low-hanging fruit when we're talking about email investigation specifically. If it's going to be something as blatantly obvious as somebody logged in from Katsina, Nigeria, that's going to be pretty easy for us to spot. I want to be clear, this is not always the case. And in fact, in this case, the attackers did not continue to use that Nigerian email address. They actually switched over to the one that was coming out of California, because that's where, as far as the information we had about the business was, they thought we were actually located. All right, so once the attackers log in, they start doing a little bit of work inside of the tenant itself. They were looking for things, and we were able to go into the user search history and figure out that they were searching for some key terms. Gave us an indication as to what we needed to do in our conversation to make sure that the hackers could actually interact with us, because remember, our account is now hacked for real, and we want to lead them down a path, mainly so that we can build a webinar like this. The very first things they did was pretty telling. They searched for invoice, they searched for payment, and then of course they searched for Owen@hackandable.com. Now remember, according to the email conversations, he is the CFO of the company. Then they went through and they viewed mailbox contents. They read every single email that was available to them. They marked things back as unread that were set that way so that we as the user would not have any idea they were actually in the account. Yeah, they're watching what's happening right now, and lucky for them, there's this big real estate transaction that's just about to happen. So here's how we went through and kind of baited this group into, well, giving us a perfect example of how business email compromise scams actually work. Sue is talking to Owen. They're talking about this upcoming transaction. Owen gives her a heads up that there's paperwork coming through, and she mentions the closing cost was about $250,000. So again, we already know that that's what the attackers are looking for. We're setting this up for them so that they'll kind of fall into our trap here. Now, almost instantly, the attackers set up what are called forwarding rules inside of the Microsoft Office 365 tenant. These are automatic rules that apply for any new emails that come in, if you're not familiar with the term. And in this case, what they're trying to do is obscure that conversation. They already know that Sue and Owen are having a conversation about a big transaction going through, and now they want to take control of that conversation. They want to guide where it actually goes, and then step in when they're ready to actually act. So the automatic forwarding rule they set up here was any email that comes into Sue's account that is from Owen gets automatically moved into the RSS folder, gets marked as read, and then processing stops on that. So now they're moving everything off into a folder that we as a normal user would traditionally not be looking in. The RSS feeds folder is very, very seldomly used during normal business communications. And if they drop an email in there and have it marked as read, there's not going to be any indicator on the screen that there's a new email in that folder. Now the attackers are going to sit back, they're going to wait, they're going to watch, and they're going to find their opportune time to jump in and take advantage of the situation that they found themselves. Now, in this case, our Microsoft Office 365 tenant is set up with a number of different security monitoring features, mainly because we want to see what Microsoft has to offer. And in this case, their defender for M365 caught on to this very, very quickly. This was really nice to see. Now, we had this set up to alert us if something weird is happening in the account, but a lot of organizations don't, which is, again, why we talk about that cloud configuration review being such an important part of your cybersecurity toolkit. In this case, it caught a few things, though. We got that impossible travel activity, meaning someone logged in from a country that is way outside the realm of where our users normally come in from. We can see things like inbox manipulation rules in place, and we can see the notification timeline as to how those are actually moving through. We also get a nice graph that's showing where the logins are coming in from, what the relation is with everything else on the tenant itself, and a nice big high alert banner. Now, again, if we hadn't set this up to notify us, then this would not automatically send off to our admin staff. We actually have to tell Microsoft that we do want to know when these things are happening. So I would highly recommend all of you who use M365, go check and just at the very minimum, make sure that you are set up to receive alerts when high severity incidents happen inside of your tenant. It also underscores the importance of monitoring and response. If we are watching for something like this happening inside of the tenant, whether we're using Microsoft's tools or our own tools, we can help catch things like this a lot faster. We don't need to sit and wait until $250,000 goes out the door before we jump in and actually stop something like this from happening. So for any cloud applications or services that you're using, and this is just our basic checklist to go through, make sure that logging is enabled. Microsoft 365 has been a lot better about this lately. Previously, they didn't enable audit logging by default. You actually had to go in and turn it on. So if you're using an older tenant, or if you purchased your Microsoft 365 license from a third-party reseller like GoDaddy or Rackspace or someone like that, make sure that it's actually enabled. In a lot of cases, those third-party resold licenses still don't have audit logging turned on, and that's something that we're going to need to do. The next thing we need to do is centralize collecting that log data, and we recommend keeping a year's worth of log data on your M365 tenant available. Oftentimes, these kind of attacks can lurk for months inside of a network, so if we're only keeping the last 30 days, that may not be enough for us to actually determine a start point and see what exactly the attackers did inside of the account. We don't want to end up having to declare a data breach because we can't confirm that the attackers didn't download the contents of the inbox, which does end up happening, unfortunately. If you have E3 licensing through M365, you get 90 days by default. If you have E5 licensing, you get 365 days. So take a look at what you have available. Make sure that you are you're fully utilizing the tools that they are giving you, because they can be fairly powerful. The other thing we want to do is define our alerts. Make sure that we are not overloading our IT security staff with a bunch of alerts that don't need to be sent out to us, but make sure the ones that do need to be seen are seen by the correct people. If we see something like an impossible travel alert, that's something that we want our staff to know about, and we want to jump on that one pretty quickly, because it's one of those big red flags that our account may have been compromised. The other thing you might want to think about is outsourcing monitoring of that tenant. If you're a small to mid-sized business and you can't afford to bring on additional staff for 24/7 monitoring or something along those lines, outsourcing the monitoring of your both your internal network and your cloud services is a pretty cost-effective way to make sure that you're not putting yourself at additional risk. It is usually way cheaper than hiring on a full-time employee, and you get that 24-hour coverage, you get weekend coverage, you get holiday coverage. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to this. Also, make sure you test your response. IBM's cost of a data breach report came out fairly recently. Organizations that test their incident response plans and actually prepare for attacks like this save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on their response, just by virtue of having a tried, true, tested incident response plan. Okay, sorry, I was soapboxing there a little bit. Let's keep moving on. So we had talked about the conversation that was happening between Owen and Sue in the Microsoft Office 365 tenant. So let's bring this to fruition. The hackers end up finding an ACH authorization form that's being passed back and forth between first Owen down to Sue and then off to our real estate agent, Paul Allen at Paul Allen Real Estate. And the attackers are now watching all of this taking place. We have an ACH form. We went ahead and sent out an email that said, "Hello, Paul, it's nice to meet you. Owen asked me to send you this form to confirm your bank account information." And we specified account information because, again, that was one of the terms that they jumped in and looked for a little bit later. We knew they'd see that one as a trigger. Now, the ACH form in this email does still need to be completed. We went ahead and left it blank on the bottom, because we wanted to see what the attackers would actually do with it. Is this something that's going to be an attractive enough lure for them to jump in and actually act on? And as it turned out, they were waiting for something exactly like this to happen. Almost immediately, they updated those forwarding rules, the ones they'd already created. So now anything that's coming in from Owen Abel, our CFO, or anything that's coming in from paulallenrealestate.com gets sent into that RSA folder. This took less than 5 minutes for them to update this forwarding rule, meaning they were actively watching the traction or the activity in the account as we were sending these emails back and forth. Now, again, this is going to go into RSS feeds. It's going to get marked as read, and we as the victim have no idea this is actually happening. Now, the attackers were actually kind of curating the inbox at this point. We found this to be pretty interesting. This was one of the forms that came through. This is coming in from the actual Paul Allen email account that we had set up. The attackers saw it. They went ahead and completely deleted it out of the account, and then they went through and purged the mailbox of any items. This means this item is now permanently deleted. We, as the victim, would have no idea this was ever in place. We would have no idea that this email had ever come through. This has gone into into the ether of the internet forever, right? Not quite. Because we were expecting something like this to happen, we turned on what's referred to as a litigation hold on the account. And when you are going through an email compromise or something similar to that, litigation hold is something that you want to enable right off the bat. This is a service that's available through the regular admin dashboard. You just click on a user, go into their mail tab, go into manage litigation hold, which is right down here, and then you click turn on litigation hold. What a litigation hold actually does is it maintains the data that is inside of that account. When a litigation hold is enabled, a user can go through and they can delete as many emails as they want to. They can delete attachments. They can delete things from SharePoint. And to them, from the front view, it's going to look like those things have all been deleted already. But on the back end of Microsoft systems, we as an administrator can go back in and we can pull those emails back out. So if someone's trying to cover their tracks, if they're trying to get rid of evidence of their deeds inside the inbox, we can go and we can pull that information back out. All right, moving forward, let's see what the attackers did next. So we talked about them looking for those paulallenrealestate.com emails. And we knew they were going to do something to try to jump into that conversation. They already had access to Sue's inbox, but they didn't have access to our Paul Allen inbox. So what did they do at that point? Well, the next thing they did was register a lookalike domain. This is something that we see as a pretty frequent step when we're talking about large-scale business email compromise. Domains are cheap, they're easy to register, and this means the attacker can now imitate the user that they're trying to get us to interact with a little bit more effectively. In this case, the attackers went through a domain registrar called Two Cows Domains. This comes out of Cape Town, South Africa. And they registered paulallenrealestate.com. Just about the same, except that real estate is not spelled correctly. This is a big trend. When attackers spoof a website, there are certain things like this that they will do to spoof. And I'll give you a couple examples of this here. It's called the technique they're using is called a homoglyph technique, and that's just the simple fact that in digital typing there's a tendency for some letters to look like other letters. Attackers will use this as their means of camouflaging where they're actually coming from. So you can see some examples here. These are websites we pulled off of OpenFish that are all clones of Indeed.com. The very first one you see here is CEO at Indeed.com. However, that's not an I, that's a lowercase l. You can see InDCL.com. In small enough type, that's going to look like Indeed. And then we also see alternate ending domains. So we can see CEO at Indeed.biz and CEO at Indeed.somesite.net. I mean, if you're looking at your fully qualified domain, remember the very last part of it is the actual domain. So if there's something standing in the way, that's not going to be the actual website. All right, so this brings up another one of our trends or another one of our tips for this specific project, and that is the importance of cybersecurity training and awareness. This is critical. Having your employees and your team members have that tool set they need to effectively defend themselves is very, very important. And realistically, it's not that difficult to do. It's minimal time investment, and it does help a lot when it comes to lowering the frequency and cost of data security incidents inside your network. Some critical topics that you can address in these trainings. Strong password hygiene is a big one. Making sure that people aren't reusing passwords, making sure they're not using ones that are easily guessed. No fall 2023 exclamation point or something like that. We don't want something that's going to make the attacker's job easier. The other thing we want to talk about is resistance to phishing. So we want to talk about looking out for phishing websites, watching out for SMS-based phishing, and we want to include voice social engineering in those attacks. We also have on-demand awareness videos and phishing simulations as a big element of this. And again, IBM's cost of a data breach report shows that simple employee training can end up saving you nearly $250,000 off the overall cost of a data breach on average if you end up suffering a compromise of one of these big systems. Let's see what actually ends up happening here. The attackers have registered a lookalike domain, and they are going to basically take over this conversation. We can see the actual real email from Paul at paulallenrealestate.com. Thanks, Susan. Nice to meet you. We'll get the information back to you as soon as possible, yada, yada, yada. The fake email comes through, and this is coming in from Paul at Paul Allen Real Estate, and they're kind of mimicking the language that they're seeing moving through here. Hi, Susan. Thanks for the email. It's nice to meet you. I will revert back to you with the details as soon as possible. And at the very beginning of this, they actually kept their English pretty solid. I mean, it was not obvious right off the bat that this was someone who spoke English as a second language. It changed as we went through the scenario a little bit, but you can see kind of where we're going here. They were very convincing at first. They also sneakily on the back end started sending email from Sue's account out to the real Paul Allen, which of course is me, so I see all this happening. But they sent forward these emails, just checking in and making sure everything was moving along okay. Usually attackers will do this as a way to kind of keep the other subject in these kind of scams from getting curious. So if I'm not getting any emails back from Sue or something like that, I may pick up the phone and actually call her. If that's the case, their scam is blown. So they're going to keep that communication chain actually going. They would also go through and then routinely delete all of these from the sent folder so that me, as the owner of the original account, can't see these email correspondence moving back and forth. Now, this is a question that we get fairly frequently, and I figured I'd address it here. When someone else's email gets hacked and you realize it, what should I do when I start getting emails from that hacked account? Because we see this happen fairly frequently. You'll get an email from somebody who is, on your contacts list, someone that you've worked with before, someone that you know, but the email just doesn't quite look right. So what do? Do you email them back and say, hey, I think your account's been hacked? No, the answer is no. Don't do that. Do not correspond with that email at all. Let the user know via a secondary method of communication that you think something may be wrong inside of their email account. In this case, we suggest things like a phone call, a text message, or something like that. Anything that's not going to go through email to start with. Also, go back through and review any correspondence you may have had with this individual. If you just noticed it, there's a chance it's been happening for a little while, and there are some telltale indicators you can look for that can show you exactly how long the account may have been compromised, or if you accidentally sent data to them that you should not have sent them. That can be very important. And if it's appropriate, talk to IT and security staff. Make sure that you are in good shape. Okay, so what happened next? Well, the attackers went ahead and filled out the ACH paperwork for us, and we were very, very grateful they decided to go for this as their overall ending point here. You can see this is signed by Paul Allen, which was nice of them. In fact, it's signed by Paul G. Allen, and we were thankful for that, because at this point in time we hadn't actually assigned Paul a middle initial, so that was nice of them to go ahead and do that for us. As it turned out, though, this was not a signature from the attackers. What the attackers actually did was do a Google search for Paul Allen. They found Paul Allen from Microsoft, one of the co-founders of the organization, who coincidentally died in 2018. Found a copy of his signature and copied it directly into the ACH form. So now they have filled out their bank account information, their signature, and they are expecting us to send $250,000 off to them. This is what we basically equate with something like a vendor invoice scam. This is kind of how these attacks work. The attackers will go in, they'll find an invoice that's being passed back and forth, and they will use the access they have to either alter the form or alter the conversation to get the money that's supposed to be paid sent to a wrong account. So how do you stop something like this from happening? Well, the big thing is going to be the use of out-of-band verification. In this case, the attackers put in banking details that, if I've worked for the organization for a while, should not be familiar with me. So if you get an email with updated bank account info, a request for a wire transfer, a request for financial data, or something like that, make sure that you're verifying out of the normal communication chain. Use something like the phone, go face-to-face with the person, use a Zoom call, and make sure you use contact information that you already have, not contact information you found from the email. Now, at this point, the hackers got a little bit persistent with us, and they kept emailing us asking when we were going to continue to send, or when we were going to complete the transaction. We like this, and so we decided to have a little bit of fun with them. So we asked the question that was begging to be asked here. I sent an email back to them that said, I spoke with Owen, and it says it looks like you're using a different bank account than you did before. Did you change banks? So they came back, yes. Our bank details changed since September 1st of September 2023. Apologize for not informing you. Kindly update your system with our new bank details. So it's all good, right? Well, let's figure out why. We asked why change, and they said that they were not happy with the old bank and the way they treats their customers. So there you go. Whatever bank they were using previously, we can safely say to avoid them, bad customer service, 1-star on Yelp, do not recommend. We decided to kind of let them go at this point because there wasn't much else we could do, but that gave us a really clear picture of exactly how these email compromises hit. And this is actually a roadmap from Microsoft that almost lines out exactly how the attack went. We had the adversary in the middle phishing. We have the sign-in with a stolen cookie and an MFA claim. Then immediately we see a mailbox search for interesting email threads, things like invoice, things like payment, things like emails from the CFO. Those are going to be registered. Next up, we see the registration of a homoglyph domain, which we were pretty close here. This was a typo squatting domain, which is very similar in nature. The creation of inbox rules that move emails around, a conversation hijack, and then finally the deletion of that sent email. This is something that we see as a pretty standardized playbook for a lot of email scammers out there. So if you suspect an email hack, respond quickly. Make sure you notify your bank if you think financial details may have been stolen. Lock out the hackers. Change your password, enable multi-factor, kill any active sessions. Make sure they're out of the account at that point. Next, we want to make sure we're preserving evidence because there will likely need to be an investigation into what happened here. So download logs, those come right out of the Security and Compliance Center for Microsoft. There are similar types of security centers for Google or for Box or for AWS or any of the other systems you may use. Place a litigation hold on the account, make sure nothing can be deleted, and activate your breach response. Also, you can report fraud to the FBI. There is a little URL right down there at the bottom of the slide, www.ic3.gov. This is the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, where if you are the victim of financial fraud or you suspect you are the victim of financial fraud, you can go ahead and report it to them. It helps us all in the long run. All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Key takeaways. One, make sure you're using strong multi-factor authentication. No more SMS messages, no more email, no more phone calls. Make sure you're using something like either number matching, verified push, or something with a biometric addition to it. It just makes sense at this point. Rely on strong caller verification if you're operating a call center. Make sure you leverage advanced call fraud detection technology. Again, this can be very helpful in determining if a phone call is fraudulent. Make sure you're using strong authentication, long, unique passwords for each individual web service. In fact, a password manager is probably the best way to go about doing that. Remember to disable weak fallback options. So if you normally use a push verification for MFA, but you have the ability to fall back to text, turn that off. Don't fall back to text because that one can be hijacked. Make sure you're implementing effective monitoring and response. Make sure you're training your team. You're running through that cybersecurity awareness training because it is very important. Use out-of-band verification. There's a typo on that slide. I will fix that. And then if you do suspect a scam, make sure you respond very quickly. If you'd like to know more about how hackers move inside your network, great news. We have our penetration testing for IT pros virtual class going live on November 14th of this year. So if you're interested in seeing how a professional pen tester actually works through your network, what they do, the tools they use, the methodology, all of that, we highly recommend checking it out. We've had a lot of fun putting this class together, and we think it's a great offering. If you register before October 20th, you get $100 off the normal price, so act now. All right, I will leave it open for questions if there are any, but thank you again for joining. And yeah, Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Matt. We do have a few questions that came from our audience during the presentation. First question is what's the most common method ransomware criminals use to get through defenses? Phishing emails?
Yeah, so when we're talking about ransomware, how they break through defenses, it really depends on the group specifically. But a lot of the lower tier ransomware groups, the ones that go after small and medium businesses specifically, get in through things like phishing emails. They'll use a poisoned document, they'll drop a remote access Trojan, they'll gain their access that way and then move through the network. They'll also, and this has been more of a recent development, they've also been leaning a lot more heavily into software exploits. So make sure that if you have exposed elements of your network, things like a web server, an Exchange server, anything like that, make sure one, you scan your perimeter frequently and see what those open services actually look like, and two, make sure you've got a strong patching schedule so that you're not leaving an old unpatched server open on the internet. Exchange servers specifically, just having one of those, according to some of the insurance companies we work with, it bumps up your chance of having to file a claim by 2-3 times. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you. Second question, what should I do if I think my email has been hacked?
So if you think your email has been hacked, we covered a little bit of it on that last couple of slides here, but what we really recommend doing is acting quickly. So if you think your email has been compromised, don't immediately blast out to everyone who you have on an email distribution list saying, don't respond to emails from me, I've been hacked. Talk to your security personnel right away. The very first thing you can probably do on your own is reset your password. Most organizations have password or self-service password reset turned on already. That's not something you need your IT staff to do. So as a very first option, go through and just reset that password. Easy enough to do. After that, again, make sure that your IT staff is locking out any active sessions, that they're reviewing log data to see if anyone did log into the account, and if so, that you're responding appropriately.
Thank you. And last question, what about bring your own device employees that don't want to put an app on their phone? How do we do a multi-factor authentication for them?
Yeah, we get that one a lot. So if you have employees who are hesitant to put something like an MFA app on their own personal phone to use inside your environment, the best way to do that is going to be using the app. There's no getting around that. And so if you can convince them to do so by letting them know that you're not taking control of their device, they just need to have this app on their phone, that's usually going to be better. If not, remember, anything is better than just a password. So if you have to use something like SMS as a last resort, go for it, but just make sure that you have additional controls on their accounts in case something else goes wrong and that one-time password does fail or gets intercepted along the way. One of the big things we usually look at there would be the use of enhanced conditional access policies for the employee, better detection on things like impossible travel, and then better alerting if something does go wrong inside the account.
Thank you, Matt. Once again, this is Sarah with LMG Security. We'd like to thank everyone who attended. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Duran, Director of Training and Research for LMG Security. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. We would love to hear from you. You can reach me at info@lmgsecurity.com, find me on LinkedIn, or follow us on Twitter. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.